Have you ever wondered how history might have changed if one quiet person, one unnoticed decision, or one hidden secret had gone differently? Not the grand battles or the famous speeches, but the invisible moments made by invisible people who never intended to be heroes. This story begins not on a battlefield, but on a cold February morning in 1942, where a young mathematician named Thomas Hargreaves stood at his narrow bedroom window, watching snowflakes dissolve on the glass. He was 24, awkward around people, but devastatingly brilliant with patterns. His life had always felt small, quiet days, quiet dreams, and a quiet heart. Then came the knock on the door. His mother opened it first. Thomas heard muffled voices, urgency, the rustle of envelopes. When he came down the stairs, a uniformed courier handed him a sealed letter with a deep red stamp, War Office Confidential, for immediate action. Thomas didn't breathe as he tore it open. He scanned the single sentence inside, and his whole world shifted beneath his feet. Your country requires your analytical skill. Report at once to Station X. He whispered aloud, Station what? But by then the courier was already gone into the snow. Thomas had no idea that this strange place called Station X would soon become the beating heart of the most important secret operation of the war, and that his quiet life was about to become anything but small. Thomas packed slowly, unsure what to bring to a place he'd never heard of. His mother, Evelyn, watched him with a trembling smile. She smoothed the collar of his coat the way she had since he was a boy. Whatever they need you for, she whispered, just don't lose your goodness. Promise me. He nodded. I promise. But he didn't feel brave. He felt like an imposter stepping into someone else's destiny. Hours later, he boarded a small train heading toward Buckinghamshire. No signs, no guards. Nothing that hinted at the monumental secret waiting for him. When the train finally stopped at a quiet, tree-lined station, a man in a worn brown suit met him without introduction. You're Thomas? Good. Follow me. Thomas swallowed. Sir, where exactly am I going? The man gave a faint smirk. Somewhere that officially doesn't exist. They drove through fields until an old Victorian mansion came into view, its windows glowing faintly through the dusk. Bletchley Park. He didn't know the name yet, but within those walls, the fate of the world was being rewritten by minds sharper than bullets. Thomas was led past armed guards, locked doors, and long corridors humming with typewriters and faint whispers. Finally, he stepped into Hut 8. The air inside felt heavy, not just with cigarette smoke, but with exhaustion and desperation. Young men and women huddled over endless streams of paper, their eyes red, their fingers stained with ink. A woman with short, dark curls looked up from her desk and grinned. Fresh blood. Wonderful. We needed new ghosts in this room. Thomas blinked. Ghosts, she gestured around dramatically. No one here sleeps. No one here exists. We haunt these desks until the war ends. He almost smiled. I'm Thomas Hargreaves. Maria Fletcher, she said, shaking his hand. Welcome to the graveyard of sanity. Despite her joke, her eyes were kind, sharp, intelligent, and unexpectedly warm. Maria became his guide, explaining that Hut 8's job was to decipher intercepted German messages encoded by a machine they called Enigma. The Germans think it's perfect, she said. Unbreakable. She leaned closer. They're wrong, and we're going to prove it. Enigma wasn't just a puzzle. It was a labyrinth of moving parts, a cipher machine with rotors, plugs, and daily changing settings that created millions of potential combinations. Thomas stared at the sheet of jumbled letters he'd been given. It looked meaningless, chaotic, impossible. What am I supposed to do with this? He asked. Maria shrugged. Find a crack in the impossible. He frowned at the sheet. These aren't just random letters. There must be linguistic anchors, repetitions, digital footprints. Maria nodded with a proud smile. Exactly. See, you're already halfway to losing your sanity like the rest of us. For the first time in his life, Thomas felt like he was standing at the edge of something huge, a challenge worthy of the mind he'd never quite fit into the world around him. But he also felt fear. If he failed, the war machine would continue unchecked. If he succeeded, people would depend on him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Days blurred into nights, nights blurred into more days. Thomas barely ate, barely slept, barely spoke. He chased patterns like ghosts in the dark. His notebook filled with scribbles, rotor predictions, expected German habits, statistical anomalies. But nothing clicked. Until one dawn, as gray light seeped through the frosted window, Thomas froze. A phrase, Wetter vor her sage, German for weather report, appeared repeatedly in different transmissions. The Germans reported the weather daily, in a predictable structure. A weakness. His heartbeat accelerated. He double-checked, triple-checked. "Maria," he whispered urgently. She stumbled over, hair messy, eyes half open, clutching a cup of cold coffee. "What is it, Tommy?" He pointed to the lines. "This word, it appears too often. Same position, similar structure. If we use it as a crib," Maria's eyes widened, "we can guess the rotor order." Minutes later, the machine in the corner began to print a decrypted message, clear, readable German text. Maria covered her mouth, tears forming. Thomas's hands shook uncontrollably. They'd done it. The impossible had cracked open. The breakthrough changed everything. Now, instead of deciphering random fragments, they received wave after wave of useful intelligence. U-boat patrol patterns, attack dates, troop deployments. The Allies suddenly had a window into the enemy's heart. But the victory came with a horrifying caveat. Maria placed a stack of decoded messages in front of Thomas. "We can't act on them all," she said quietly. "Why? If we respond too quickly, the Germans will know. They'll change the system. Enigma will become unbreakable." Thomas stared at the messages, reading about convoys he knew would be attacked, soldiers who would walk into traps, families who would never see their sons again. "And we just let it happen," he whispered. Maria nodded, eyes heavy with sorrow. "Sometimes saving millions means sacrificing hundreds, and we have to live with that." Thomas pressed his palms into his eyes, shaking. This wasn't heroism, this was torment. But he stayed, because someone had to bear the weight. One night, they intercepted a devastating message. A massive German U-boat strike was planned on a supply convoy leaving Iceland. Thomas grabbed the paper. "We have to warn them." Maria took his arm gently. "We can't. Maria, people will die. If we warn them, Richter will know. Germany will change everything." Thomas slammed his fist against the desk, tears stinging his eyes. "How can we sit here and watch it happen?" Maria's voice broke. "We don't watch. We endure." The next morning, news arrived. The convoy was destroyed. Hundreds lost at sea. Thomas spent the night alone behind the hut, crying silently. He felt complicit. He felt damned. But the next morning, he returned to his desk. Not because he was strong, but because people had died, and he couldn't bear letting their deaths be in vain. Over the following months, Thomas noticed Maria becoming quieter. Her jokes faded. Her eyes looked haunted. One rainy evening, she finally broke. "My brother, Daniel," she whispered, staring at her trembling hands. "He's a soldier in the 9th Battalion." Thomas's heart tightened. "You found something." She nodded slowly. "We intercepted a message today. His battalion is walking straight into a trap." Maria, I'm so sorry. She wiped her face roughly. I'm not supposed to read the transmissions, but I saw it. I saw his unit number. Can we warn them? She shook her head. No. If we intervene, Enigma is gone. Everything we've done, all the lives we can save, would collapse. Thomas reached for her hand. She squeezed it, her voice cracking. We save who we can, Tommy, even if we can't save the ones we love. Those words would shape him forever. After Maria's confession, Thomas changed. He worked not with desperation, but with determination. Not with fear, but with purpose. He developed shortcuts for predicting rotor patterns. He built statistical models no one else understood. He taught others the methods he created. Morale in Hut 8 rose. Successes multiplied. One afternoon, Maria leaned over his shoulder and whispered, "You're keeping this place alive." Thomas shook his head. "No, we're keeping each other alive." He remembered his mother's words, "Don't lose your goodness." And he realized goodness wasn't always gentle. Sometimes it was painful, gritty, and exhausting. But it was still goodness. Not all Germans were faceless enemy shapes on the horizon. Some had names. And one name arrived like a dark cloud. Colonel Dieter Richter. A decrypted message mentioned him, a senior intelligence officer who inspected cipher protocols. Maria frowned deeply. I've heard of him. Cold, brilliant, paranoid. Thomas scanned the message. Richter complained about statistical anomalies in recent Allied responses. He's noticing patterns, Thomas said, a chill running through him. If he convinces Berlin that Enigma is compromised, then everything we've built collapses, Maria finished. Richter became a ghostly presence in Hut 8, an adversary Thomas would never meet, yet battle every single day. Some enemies carried guns, some carried doubts. Richter carried both. Winter tightened its grip on Bletchley Park. Frost laced the windows, and cold air seeped through the thin walls of Hut 8. But something else was freezing the room from the inside out. A new batch of German messages with unfamiliar settings. Thomas frowned at the intercepted code groups. These are different, he muttered. The structure is off. The encryption depth increased. Maria's breath hitched. No, they didn't. A supervisor hurried in, waving a document. Confirmed. Berlin approved Colonel Richter's request. They've added a fourth rotor. The room fell silent. The fourth rotor wasn't just a complication. It was a nightmare. It multiplied the number of possible combinations beyond anything Bletchley had seen. Thomas felt the crushing weight of dread. Richter had sensed something. He didn't know the truth, but he was close. Far too close. Maria placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. We beat them before, she whispered. We'll beat them again. But even she didn't fully believe it. That night, Thomas worked until his vision blurred. For the first time since joining Bletchley, he felt the bitter taste of fear. Not of dying, but of failing. Failing the world. The fourth rotor wasn't a puzzle. It was a battlefield. Inside Hut 8, every chalkboard, every desk, every inch of free space filled with frantic scribbles, patterns, probabilities, guesses, hopes. Thomas barely slept. He lived on cold tea and adrenaline. He could feel Maria watching him with growing worry. You're going to collapse, she warned one night. I don't have that luxury, he replied. She knelt beside him. Tommy, you can't save the world if you destroy yourself. But he shook his head. He couldn't stop. Not while German U-boats circled the Atlantic. Not while soldiers walked unknowingly into traps. Not while the world hung by threads of code. Slowly, painfully, breakthroughs emerged. A repeated call sign. A lazy radio operator's mistake. A structural redundancy Richter hadn't accounted for. Piece by piece, the team chipped away at the fourth rotor's defenses. And then, after weeks of torment, The machine finally spit out a decrypted message. Clear text. Readable. Human. Hut 8 erupted in exhausted, disbelieving cheers. Maria threw her arms around Thomas, tears in her eyes. "You did it," she whispered. "No," Thomas said, shaking, overwhelmed. "We did." Germany had never realized their perfect machine had been shattered twice, and Richter remained suspicious but powerless. The decrypted messages grew more alarming. One morning, a transmission revealed Germany's plan to launch a massive airstrike on Allied supply lines, a strike capable of crippling their resources. Maria read it aloud, voice trembling. "If they pull this off, the war stretches for years." A high-ranking officer from London arrived at Bletchley to assess the information. "We're acting on this," he said firmly. Maria's jaw tightened. "Sir, if the Germans see we prepared for this, Richter will know. We can't react directly. We'll craft a cover story," the officer countered. "We'll say a spy reported it." Thomas exchanged a terrified look with Maria. This was the most dangerous gamble yet. If they acted too convincingly, Enigma's compromise would become obvious. If they acted too subtly, thousands would die. In war, even intelligence could become a weapon of self-destruction. That evening, Thomas walked outside, breathing the cold night air. He whispered to himself, "Please let this be the right decision." The following week, the Allies intercepted and neutralized the German operation. Barely. The Germans screamed about traitors. Richter demanded an internal investigation. But Enigma survived another day. Just barely. War had a strange way of forging bonds between strangers. Thomas and Maria became inseparable, not romantically, but in a way even deeper. They understood each other's nightmares, their quiet hopes, their invisible wounds. One night, during a rare pause in the chaos, Maria handed him a tin mug of tea. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, "what will become after this?" Thomas shrugged, staring at his trembling hands. "I spent years thinking my life would never matter. Now, I'm terrified that it does." She laughed gently. "Only you would be afraid of being important." He smiled. "And you? What will you do?" Her eyes softened. "Find a reason to breathe again. Maybe build something instead of saving something. Teach. Travel. Help children who won't remember what war feels like." Thomas nodded slowly. "That's a good life." "That's the dream," she whispered. For the first time, Thomas realized that Maria wasn't just carrying the war. She was carrying her grief, her brother's memory, her fear of a future she wasn't sure she deserved, and he silently vowed to protect her humanity, even as they sacrificed pieces of their own. Just when the horizon seemed to calm, Richter struck again. A new decrypted message arrived, one that froze the room. Richter had compiled a detailed report of statistical anomalies, demanding a complete overhaul of German encryption systems. Maria whispered, "He's found too much. He's too close." No machine, no algorithm, no genius could keep up if the Germans replaced Enigma entirely. Thomas analyzed the report with intense focus. Something in the phrasing, the structure, the urgency seemed off. "He's worried," Thomas murmured. "His superiors don't fully trust him. They think he's overreacting." Maria raised an eyebrow. "So? So we use it," he said. "We turn his fear against him." For the first time, Thomas wasn't just solving codes. He was thinking like an intelligence officer. Thomas proposed a daring plan: forge a low-ranking German message implying Richter himself was leaking information or mishandling security, not accusing him directly, just enough to sow distrust. Maria stared at him, shocked. "Tommy, that's dangerous. If anything goes wrong—" "It won't," he said, though fear tugged at his heart. "It can't. They crafted the message meticulously, using authentic linguistic quirks, operator habits, and formatting they had studied for months. When the false message was sent through disguised channels, time seemed to slow. 2 days later, they intercepted a German transmission. Richter had been removed from code security duties, demoted, disgraced. Maria exhaled shakily. "You did it. My God, you actually did it." Thomas didn't feel triumphant. He felt hollow. War twisted even the best minds into weapons. Confirmation came in multiple intercepts. Richter was furious, convinced he was the victim of office politics. He blamed rivals. He blamed bureaucracy. He never once suspected the truth. The man who nearly saved German communications was silenced by the very system he tried to protect. Thomas watched the papers print, feeling a strange mix of guilt and relief. Maria touched his arm gently. "We didn't destroy him," she said softly. "He was fighting for the wrong side, and if he'd succeeded, millions more would die." Thomas nodded, but his chest still felt tight. Some victories didn't feel like victories at all. With Richter gone and Enigma stable, the tide of war finally shifted. The Allies gained ground in North Africa. The Atlantic became safer. Air raids grew less frequent. Yet inside Bletchley Park, exhaustion filled the air more than celebration. Thomas looked around the hut, faces pale, shoulders slumped, souls drained. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt old, older than the calendar could justify. Maria found him sitting alone outside, watching the sunrise. "It's ending," she whispered. "We're finally winning." Thomas nodded slowly. "But why doesn't it feel like I thought it would?" "Because peace doesn't erase the cost," she replied. "It just stops the bleeding." He closed his eyes. Maybe that was enough. When Germany finally surrendered, Bletchley Park didn't celebrate openly. They simply stood in the hut, silent, overwhelmed, unsure how to process the end of a war they had fought in total secrecy. Then came the orders. All of them were required to sign a document stating that everything they had done, the breakthroughs, the losses, the impossible victories, must remain silent for decades. No glory, no recognition, not even stories shared with family. Maria signed with steady hands. Thomas's hand shook so much the pen nearly slipped. Afterward, Maria whispered, "We were never meant to be known. That's what makes it meaningful." He looked at her. She was smiling, but her eyes were sad. "We saved the world," he murmured. "No," she corrected gently. "We helped it remember how to hope." A year after the war, Thomas lived quietly in a small flat in London, teaching mathematics to children who complained about homework and had no idea their quiet teacher once held the world together. One morning, a letter arrived. Maria's handwriting. He opened it with trembling hands. "Tommy, I'm leaving England for a while, maybe for good. I want to teach children who lost everything in the war. They deserve a life untouched by code, fear, or loss. You inspired me more than you know." Thomas felt tears gather in his eyes. "You once asked me what we become after the war. I think the answer is simple. We become better. We saved the world once. Now it's time to save small pieces of it, one soul at a time. Whatever you choose to do, choose it with goodness. You proved every day that quiet people can change everything." The letter ended with, "Thank you for being my light in the darkest room." Thomas pressed the letter to his chest. The twist was clear now, beautiful and painful. The true victory was not breaking Enigma. It was breaking the belief that ordinary people can't change history. Thomas closed his eyes and whispered, "I'll keep being good, Maria. I promise." And somewhere far away, Maria was keeping that promise too. One child, one lesson, one act of quiet kindness at a time.